Hey everyone, welcome back to The Explainer. Today we are unpacking a seriously fascinating question. Why did our ancient ancestors actually start wars? We usually picture these stoic warriors fighting for grand, epic causes. But honestly, the historical record shows something entirely different, and it tells us a whole lot about who we are today. Okay, let's dive right into this. We almost always associate historical warfare with noble, logical reasons, right? Defending land, fighting for freedom, securing essential resources. But in reality, human beings have routinely mobilized and literally slaughtered each other over things like pigs, or a stomachache, or even slightly different loincloths. To a modern observer, it just looks completely irrational. Now, before you go dismissing our ancestors as just being chaotic or rational, it's really important to understand that this isn't just ancient history being weird for the fun of it. Anthropology and evolutionary psychology have actually proven that these seemingly stupid, bizarre reasons for war were highly calibrated survival tools. When you look past the surface-level madness, you find these deep, subconscious survival mechanisms at play. So let's count down the 4 most surprising reasons ancient tribes went to war so we can understand exactly how this worked. Kicking off our countdown with reason number 4. And honestly, this sounds like the setup to a joke. Why declare war over pigs? To figure this out, we have to look at the Tsembaga Meringue tribe in the highlands of New Guinea. They'd periodically go to war with their neighbors, and the stated reasons usually involve things like perceived insults, a stolen pig, or maybe a disputed boundary line in a garden. But it turns out the actual trigger was a chaotic pig population crisis. To put this into perspective for you, it's basically the ancient equivalent of starting a massive, vicious neighborhood feud, just so you have a valid excuse to eat your roommate's hoarded lax. I know, it sounds totally deadpan and ridiculous, but that is exactly what was happening on a massive tribal scale. They literally needed a socially acceptable excuse to start a giant feast. So here's how this ecological pig crisis actually played out, according to anthropologist Roy Rappaport. The tribe's pig population would just grow way too large for the local environment to handle. The pigs became a massive nuisance, eventually breaking into the humans' gardens and completely devouring their vital sweet potato crops. And the solution to this ecological nightmare? Declare war on the neighbors over an insult. That resulting conflict created a mandatory, totally socially acceptable excuse to slaughter and feast on all those excess pigs. So this wasn't a breakdown of society at all. It was just a brutal, bloody, but highly effective form of ecological population control. Moving on to reason number 3. Imagine you suddenly get a terrible stomachache or maybe some bad food poisoning. Who do you blame? Well, if you were part of the Yanomami tribe in the Amazon basin, the answer was simple and absolutely deadly. Among the Yanomamis, sudden illness or death was almost never seen as a natural occurrence. Nope, it was immediately assumed to be the result of hostile magic from a neighboring village. Think about it like this. Launching a retaliatory raid against a neighboring village just because you ate a bad berry is basically the ancient equivalent of blaming your neighbor's Wi-Fi for your own slow internet, and then marching over and throwing a brick right through their front window. It's a massive escalation based entirely on a misunderstanding of how the physical world works. But there was a much deeper psychological layer to this blame game. And this brilliantly illustrates the psychology of sorcery. Look, in a world completely devoid of germ theory, sorcery became a super necessary placeholder for the terrifying unknown. When people get sick and die for literally no visible reason, panic naturally sets in. Blaming a neighbor served a totally vital psychological function. It immediately unified the tribe against a common, external scapegoat, replacing that internal, creeping fear with shared outrage. It actually brought the community closer together, precisely when they felt the most vulnerable. All right, now for reason number 2, fighting just for the sheer sake of fighting. The Aztec Empire engaged in something called Xochiayoyoltl, or flower wars. These were highly regulated, completely prearranged clashes against rivals like the Tlaxcalans. They weren't fighting to conquer land, and they weren't fighting to steal resources. These wars were designed specifically to capture prisoners for religious sacrifice, and really importantly, to give young warriors a safe, controlled arena to earn social status and prestige. If you want a modern parallel for this, it is incredibly similar to 2 rival corporations agreeing to host a mandatory, completely pointless hackathon over the weekend just to give their employees a chance to pad their resumes and earn some bragging rights. Everyone knows the rules. Everyone knows it's a controlled environment, but the competition is still absolutely fierce because social standing is on the line. What we're really talking about here is institutionalized violence. By channeling young male aggression into this highly regulated, rule-bound format, the Aztec state successfully prevented random chaotic civil wars that could have easily torn their empire apart from the inside. At the same time, it satisfied their deep cultural demands for blood, sacrifice, and prestige. It was essentially a giant pressure valve built right into the very fabric of their society. So, we've seen ecological population control, the psychology of scapegoating, and institutionalized violence. But what is the overarching, number one reason behind ancient intertribal violence? Like, what is the ultimate, most absurd, unexpected trigger that caused our ancestors to take up arms against one another? Well, it comes down to what we can call the slightly different loincloth effect. When anthropologists actually look at the data, the absolute most common triggers for violence were minor perceived insults. We're talking about a stolen tool, a disputed hunting path, a slight difference in dialect, or even just a different style of body paint or loincloth. These incredibly small differences were enough to spark massive, deadly conflicts. So the crucial point here is understanding the evolutionary psychology behind this, specifically a phenomenon known as parochial altruism. See, early humans evolved in incredibly harsh environments, where survival depended entirely on the group. Because of that, we evolved to be intensely cooperative and altruistic within our own specific group, but simultaneously deeply suspicious and totally hostile to any outgroups. It's the core psychological software that kept our ancestors alive, where entrusting a stranger could very easily mean death. And you know what? You actually experience this software running in your own brain today. It's the exact same psychological bug that makes modern people get irrationally angry at rival sports fans. You can feel genuine, intense hatred for someone just because they're wearing a different colored jersey, even though you have absolutely nothing in common with the millionaire athletes who actually play for your team. Your brain just registers outgroup, and boom, it immediately triggers hostility. The big takeaway here is that our brains did not evolve to seek truth or objective reality. They evolved to seek tribal cohesion. To the ancient brain, backing down from a minor insult, like a stolen tool or a petty border dispute, wasn't just letting something go. No, it signaled weakness. And in the ancient world, signaling weakness practically invited actual exploitation and destruction from rival tribes. Basically, you had to fight over the small things just to prove you would fight over the big things. When we map these ancient anxieties directly onto today, the parallels are honestly striking. We look back at ancient tribes fighting over sweet potato gardens, and we call them primitive. But today, instead of sweet potato gardens, we fight these toxic battles over pixels on a screen. Instead of ritualized skirmishes, we violently clash over political ideologies. Instead of disputed hunting paths, we fight and die over imaginary lines drawn on maps. The ancient anxieties over identity and resources are exactly the same. They've just found a shiny new arena on the internet and in modern geopolitics. 200,000. That's the number of years since our underlying biological software had a major update. Strip away the smartphones, the tailored suits, and the centuries of recorded history, and what's actually left? We're still just groups of anxious primates, desperately trying to protect our identity, our resources, and our fragile sense of order. The weapons have completely changed, sure, but the brains wielding them? Not at all. Which leaves us with this final thought to ponder. The next time you're online or watching the news and you feel that sudden surge of visceral, completely irrational anger toward an outgroup, stop and ask yourself, are you really having a rational modern debate? Or are you just a Stone Age brain looking for an excuse to start a modern flower war? It's definitely something to think about. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking questions, and I'll see you next time.